The worksheet change event is triggered every time a worksheet change has been made. And you will notice that the code is behind the sheet loan amortization worksheet object rather than a regular code module. I'll show that in a minute. The target range variable, a parameter for this procedure, is typically either a single cell or a range of cells that need to be examined for changes. And appropriate actions are then taken as a result of those changes. So in our case, we're targeting a single cell, B12, and monitoring the changes made as a result of a user selecting a different cutoff date coming from their range of payment dates. The objective is to find both the remaining principal and interest savings if the loan was to be paid off early. For example, in early 2050, the remaining principal is still about half of the original loan, so about 100 grand. This amount will simply be looked up based on the exact payment date, such as February 1st, 2050. The accumulated interest as of the same date is found in the same row of the table and needs to be subtracted from the total interest that is at the bottom right corner of the entire amortization table. The difference would be the interest savings from paying the loan early. To make this calculation more accurate, the tax deductibility of interest payment should also be taken into account, as was mentioned in the previous video, but this is quite beyond the scope of what we are doing here. So let me switch to the example and then show the cutoff date cell B12 that is based off of the column I with all the payment dates. Okay, and then what we are trying to do using that February 1st of 2050 an example, we are trying to look up or match up this with a date in column I, all right, which will be, somewhere again 20 years, less into the loan, about here. Okay, and then we're going to look up the remaining principal, which is a little under 100,000, about 98,000. There are cumulative interest of 120, which we're going to subtract from a total interest of 143 to get about 22,000 in savings. And then we're going to insert those two numbers, 98,000 and 22,000, into these two cells below the cutoff date. So the objective of the example should be clear. If we switch to the code, you'll notice that we are still in the loan amortization module at the bottom of our previous video, and we're going to close that guy and right click on the sheet 1 loan amortization code module to view the code sitting, so to speak, behind the loan amortization sheet and reacting, okay, in this case to the changes in the worksheet being made. Okay, the target variable captures which part of the worksheet do we want to examine, or have reaction to the changes in, and this is going to be only in that single cell B12, right? So if the B12 is changed from February 1st 2050 until another date, we want to capture that change with this event. Okay, notice that some of the variables are already defined. The cutoff date is going to be that February 1st 2050. The last row is essentially the bottom of the table, which is the row 364. The number of rows is now total number of rows in the amortization table, which is 360. The range amortization schedule is the entire yellow sheet, or yellow table here, I should say, excluding the column H, which we don't need in this example, as I'll show in a minute. And then we have the financial variables for the remaining principal, 98,000, total interest, 143,000, cumulative interest, 121,000. This is all as of that February 1st, 2050, and then interest saving of about $22,000. We'll start by checking whether the change occurred in cell B12 using the target variable and its address property. Okay, examining against the cell $B$12. Okay, so the end if needs to be manually inserted at the bottom in this case. So if that is the case, and that is the only change in the worksheet that we care to track, essentially, right? If anything else changes in the other cell, this is not going to impact this event. So what we want to do next is grab the current, or I should say the new cutoff date, using a cutoff date variable, and then target cell, which now we know is B12, and its value, which is presumably a different cutoff date after user changes the selection. Then the next thing we're going to do is set the range for the lookup, essentially the entire amortization table except column age, as I'll show in a second. We're going to start by finding the bottom or last row of the table, which presumably in a more elaborate example would be dynamic. In other words, it wouldn't always be 364, but it would depend on whether the loan is a 30-year loan, 15-year loan, 20-year loan, or whatever it may be the case. So the last row is the integer variable declared at the top, and it's going to be set to, starting with the Excel object, the active sheet, which we now know must be the loan amortization sheet, because that's where the worksheet change event gets triggered from. We're going to start with the top left corner, the familiar cell H4. I'm going to use the end property and Excel down, which is not coming down out of the drop off, and its row property to get to the bottom of the range that is continuous, starting with cell H4, and that will be 364 in this case. And then using that number, we're going to set the RNG amortization schedule, as shown, declared right here at the top, to again using the Excel object active sheet. Of course, I could have used that W loans variable and so forth from before. I'm just trying to show different ways of doing the same thing. The range object, which then starts in the column I rather than age, because column I has the dates that's needed to be the first column for the VLOOKUP column to work. The fifth row is the first row with, I believe it's September 1st, 2030, skipping the header, going all the way to M, that includes the cumulative interest, and then adding the whatever last row is, right? So that essentially ends up being the range I5 through M, I5 through M, 364, like that. Okay, let's save that. The next step is to look up the remaining principal from the amortization schedule, right? And then insert that into cell B13. We already know what the answer is. It's that 98,000 associated with February 1st. 1, 2, 3, 4 columns over, $98,107, right? So I'm going to switch back here, and the code for it is rem prints remaining principal as of that date is using Excel object, and now we're going to use the worksheet function collection, essentially. It's another object, of course, and within that we're going to use the VLOOKUP function, which is going to be a little bit more generic than those financial functions, coming from the worksheet function collection. We would have to find the particular library where VLOOKUP belongs to get more targeted or more descriptive arguments. But we should remember that the first argument is the cutoff date. The second argument is the entire table, range, amortization schedule. The third argument is, the column that we want to grab the value from, which is, I believe it was fifth, and then false means exact match. Let me double check that it is the fifth column over. 1, 2, 3, I think it's fourth. So I need to change that to 4. Okay. And then next, I need to insert into that Excel object active sheet, right? And then range is, I believe, B13, which we'll double check as well. And its value property, the remaining principal. Right? So that will insert that 98,000 into this cell over here. Okay, The next step is to find the total interest. We're finding the number of rows of the table, which we know is 360 for the 30-year loan, and then using the sales property to show another way of doing things of the range object to find the bottom right corner. So the bottom right corner I'm referring to is is right here. This cell, essentially M364 in the current example. Once we find that number, then we're going to have the last step of looking up the cumulative interest as of 2/1 or February 1, 2050, and then the difference is the interest savings. Okay, so one thing at a time though. So this step first finds num rows, right, which we know is 360, just using the range amortization schedule. Okay, and then it's rows collection, no row but plural rows, and the count. So that's going to result in 360, and then using that number, we're going to find the total interest from the range amortization schedule. Okay, using sales property, right? So the sales property is literally what you think it is for the range object. The cells start with 0. 0 is top left cell, and so forth and so on, right? So in this case, num rows is the 360th row. I believe it's actually 1 is the top cell. I'll double check that later. And then we'll go 5 columns over again, right? So that should be the bottom right corner of the table, 360 rows and 5 columns over. So that should be that of $143,000, which we then finally use to in conjunction with cumulative interest, which is similar to this lookup. So let me see if I can copy paste and modify correctly. So cumulative interest as of cutoff date is in the 5th column. Okay, and then I'm going to copy this guy here, all right, which is B14, where I want to have the total interest minus the cumulative interest to get that 22,000 roughly. Okay, so now let's review, make sure we did everything. We targeted cell B12, grab the current date, which right now is that February 1st, 2050 as a test example. Then we set the range for the lookup, which is essentially columns I through M, first to last row, from September 1st to that bottom right corner of 143,000 cumulative interest. Then we looked up the remaining principal, which is in the 4th column over from the column I, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we found the bottom row, 360, in using the cells property just to learn different properties of range object. We found the total interest in the basically bottom right corner of the table, 365, and using that, after looking up the cumulative interest for that date, the 121,000, which I believe again is about here. We subtracted that 100 from 143 to get about 22,000. Let's see if it works. So to activate this event, what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to make the change. So I'm going to make a change to just one month later, and we'll see. Of course, there's an error. They're unable to look up. So I think I need to use. It's getting confused with the dates. I think I had that issue, and I added the C double, which for some reason seemed to have worked. Let's test that. I looked this up on Google. I believe that's the case, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm going to switch this back to the first, and then I get the result expected. I'm not quite sure. So first of all, the 98,022 that I keep repeating is there, so it is correct. I'm not quite sure what the logic behind needing the C double here is, but That after some research seemed to have worked. So we'll just want to take it as it is. Switch back to the presentation, and this is again a good place to pause.